Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. Republican senators toured the U.S.-Mexico border. They found facilities overrun with migrants, with one pod over 8 times its capacity. And they learned how taxpayer dollars are helping migrants finish their journey to the U.S. A multi-tornado rampage puts southern states in the U.S. flat on their backs. Some residents say they've lost everything. Georgia's new election law now hit with its first lawsuit. But why do Democrats oppose it? We look into what's in this new law to learn more. Multiple tornadoes hit the southeast U.S. on Thursday, leaving destruction in their wake. NTD's Don Tran has more.
Scenes of desolation and tragedy have gripped dozens of communities in the southeast U.S. Trees and telephone poles lie on the ground, ripped to pieces, and houses are severely damaged. The devastation came after a huge storm produced a wave of powerful tornadoes on Thursday. A Georgia resident described one of the tornadoes.
The very first thing was a torrential rain for about 3 seconds and then nothing. It went completely dead. And then 3 seconds of hard rain and dead again. And that's when I knew it was coming. Because then you heard the train coming. And it sounded just like it. So I've lived through it and don't want to do it again.
The storm impacted parts of Georgia, Mississippi, and Tennessee. About 50 million people were in the path of severe weather. Reports say at least 5 people have been killed by the storm, including 3 from one family in eastern Alabama. Their relative, Sheldon Abbott, said he lost everything.
I mean, it just can't explain it. You know, you hear about it every day on the news, but once it hits you, it hits you.
But in all the pain and suffering, there lied a story of hope. One woman said the tornado ripped through the roof of her house but left the cross in her backyard untouched. She said her husband built the cross as a sign of faith at the beginning of the pandemic.
It's just God. And my husband built that last year when COVID started and we didn't have any means of work. If you don't believe in miracles, then something's wrong with you.
This is the second wave of destructive tornadoes in 2 weeks. Press Secretary Jen Psaki said the White House is monitoring the situation and is ready to give federal assistance. Don Tran, NTD News.
More updates on the Boulder, Colorado shooting on Monday. Law enforcement agencies are still investigating the motive behind it, but the local district attorney confirms that the suspect's firearms were legally purchased.
The suspect is believed to have used an AR-556 pistol that was purchased legally in Arvada, Colorado. He was also in possession of a 9mm handgun, and at this point in time, it's not believed that that was used during the incident.
The suspect bought his firearm 6 days before the shooting. The owner of the gun store in Arvada reportedly said the suspect passed a background check and the Colorado Bureau of Investigation approved the sale. The district attorney says the FBI is still investigating the suspect's firearms. They have yet to determine his motive and whether he has any ties to international terrorist groups. The district attorney also says they want to make sure the suspect is tried in Boulder, not in any other part of Colorado. And speaking at a press conference today, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said we can expect executive orders on gun measures from President Biden, but she didn't say when those will come. A New Jersey university says if you want to hit the books, you'll have to get the shot. They're the first school to publicly require getting vaccinated against COVID-19. NTD's Miguel Moreno has more on that and the latest virus trends.
In general, you can't go to schools in some states without getting vaccinated against certain diseases. But Rutgers University is the first to say they'll require getting a COVID-19 vaccine. Their chancellor said the COVID-19 vaccines have proven to be safe and effective in preventing serious illness, hospitalization, and death, and that they're essential in bringing campus life closer to normal. So students wanting to attend this fall will need to get the shot. But there's room for medical and religious exemptions. Now, do you remember the former CDC director, Dr. Robert Redfield? Well, he weighed in on the origins of the CCP virus. Here's a clip.
Normally when a pathogen goes from a zoonotic to human, it takes a while for it to figure out how to become more and more efficient in human-to-human transmission. I just don't think this makes biological sense.
So where could this make sense? He says in a lab.
Most of us in the lab, we're trying to grow a virus. We try to help make it grow better and better and better and better and better and better so we can do experiments and figure out about it. That's the way I put it together.
Dr. Anthony Fauci didn't sound very supportive of the theory, but he didn't deny the possibility.
However, the alternative explanation, which most public health individuals go by, is that this virus was actually circulating in China, likely in Wuhan, for a month or more before they were clinically recognized at the end of December of 2019.
So he says the virus could have adapted to the environment in that time and learned to spread more efficiently. The WHO says the lab theory is extremely unlikely, but dozens of scientists have openly criticized their research as compromised and illegitimate, and they started their investigation a year after the outbreak. Now let's go over the trends. The nation's daily case average is rising. We ended Thursday with a 7-day moving average of 58,600, and new hospitalizations, which were falling consistently for a while, appear to have plateaued. Currently, we have a 7-day average of 4,700 new admissions. Now, up to date, the DOJ's charged over 470 people for COVID-19 related fraud. And in total, the DOJ says these defendants tried to fraudulently get $569 million from the U.S. The Paycheck Protection Programs have been a prime target. For example, on Wednesday, a 47-year-old man from Phoenix was charged for trying to get $450,000 from the government to pay for his non-existent staff and business. He's been hit with 3 counts of fraud related to emergency disaster funds and 3 counts of wire fraud. Steph, that's it for this roundup. Back to you.
Thanks, Miguel. And business owners in Michigan say they want an old pipeline to go, but their state representatives want to keep it. We spoke with some of those lawmakers about why they'd want to keep the pipeline open.
Businesses dependent on Michigan's freshwater resources criticized the state's energy committee for not giving them a voice. They said they support shutting down an old oil pipeline because it's harmful to the environment. In 2010, the pipeline burst and spilled crude oil into the Kalamazoo River, upending residents' lives and businesses. But the lawmakers argue the pipeline has gone over 60 years without leaking oil. They also brought up the Great Lakes Tunnel project.
So take that no leaking over 60 years, put that pipeline in a tunnel 100 feet below in bedrock, encased by a cement structure, you'll have no leaks at all.
Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer gave Enbridge Energy, the Canadian company that owns the pipeline, until May to stop transporting oil through the Straits of Mackinac. The state reps laid out the consequences of shutting down the pipeline. They also talked about the risks of choosing trains and trucks to move oil.
It would be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of jobs, and everything would go up in price because your propane would go up in price, your oil would go up in price, your food would go up in price because we use a lot of farmers. In fact, most of our farmers in Michigan and outlying areas use propane to dry the crops before they send them to the market.
The heavy snow that the UP gets could certainly block the transportation via rail and also via trucks as well. So there's some serious logistical concerns during times of inclement weather that we could face here in Michigan.
Ohio and Louisiana Sunday stepped into Enbridge's lawsuit against Michigan's governor. The states worry many of their residents would lose their jobs if the pipeline was shut down. One of the Michigan lawmakers said he believes the federal government will step in.
I do believe the federal government will step in here, but just think about if your energy needs were continuing, but it was gone. And what would you do to make this happen? So that's what we're looking at.
Businesses supporting the shutdown said more oil is being transported through the Great Lakes region than can be refined in the area. And Line 5 is a shortcut to move oil that primarily benefits Canada. Don Tran, NTD News.
The University of Southern California just reached a whopping $852 million settlement with more than 700 alleged sexual assault victims. The settlement is the largest of its kind for any university in the U.S. history.
The University of Southern California will pay a record-setting $852 million to settle dozens of sexual assault misconduct allegations. This settlement, along with a previous class action lawsuit in 2019, brings the total dollar amount USC is paying out in the sexual assault scandal to over $1 billion. USC calls the settlement fair and reasonable. Attorneys for the more than 700 victims say the amount is, quote, the largest sexual abuse settlement against any university and the largest personal injury settlement against any university in history. The lawsuits were against a former campus gynecologist, George Tyndall. He is facing criminal charges for nearly 30 cases of sexual assault and sexual battery, which date back more than 20 years. Tyndall is now in his 70s. He practiced at USC for nearly 3 decades, but he was quietly let go by the school when allegations of sexual misconduct came to surface in 2016. At the time, the school did not report him to the state medical board. He has pleaded not guilty to the crimes and awaits trial.
Georgia's new election law is now hit with its first lawsuit. Stacey Abrams' new Georgia project, Black Voters Matter Fund, claims the law violates voters' rights. But what's actually in this new election law, and why do Democrats so strongly oppose it? NTD's Melina Weiskup has the story.
There were many alarming issues with how the election was handled, and those problems understandably led to the crisis of confidence in the ballot box here in Georgia.
In the 2020 presidential race, over 1 million Georgians voted by mail. Now, Georgians voting by mail will need to be ID verified. That's to replace the current signature matching process. And drop boxes will be placed inside early voting locations instead of on the streets.
I believe the problems that we've had with election integrity stem from the absentee ballots. That's why it was a huge question. But what I do like about the drop boxes, nobody can just take and dump absentee ballots in the drop box. I mean, they can't do that anymore.
And the new law requires all scanned images of ballots to be public records. Jackson gave her testimony to lawmakers as they were writing up the bills that make up the new law. She calls it a step in the right direction, but she's concerned that Democrats who are railing against it didn't try to suggest improvements.
What they're doing outside with protesting, I didn't see any amendments come forth. And I got a problem with that if we're all trying to work for the people. What has been told through this bill is that the people of color do not have the right to vote now. That's not true. They have the right to vote. They just need an ID. And I love the ID piece.
Democrats from the local to the federal level are painting the law as restricting voting rights. Biden calling the law sick.
Deciding in some states that you cannot bring water to people standing in line waiting to vote. Deciding that you're going to end voting at 5 o'clock when working people are just getting off work.
But the legislation actually adds 2 extra weekend days per month, and it does not require precincts to close at 5 p.m. They can stay open as long as 7 p.m., and 7 p.m. has always been the closing time for Georgia polls. As for Biden's critique that the law stops people from handing out water to voters in line, the legislation explains that this is to prevent political pressure from groups giving out free stuff to change minds. That did indeed happen in 2020's election. Senator Warnock's campaign was among those groups. And we know just how important Georgia has been in congressional elections. With this past election, the 2 Democrats that took those seats flipped the majority in the Senate. And we know that Republicans just need a small number of seats to win back the majority in the House. So we know that 2022 will be super important for these congressional elections. Now the question is, will this new voter law in Georgia change the voter turnout in the state in 2022? Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
And this election law has drawn anger from some Democrats who claim it's a weapon of voter suppression. Georgia State Representative Park Cannon was among many who protested against the new law. The representative's objection landed her in jail, but Democrats say they're ready to challenge her charges in court.
And we are definitely lawyered up to defend her in every way we know how.
State Representative Park Cannon released from jail to a crowd of supporters, including Georgia Senator Raphael Warnock. The representative was cuffed and forcibly escorted from Georgia's Capitol building for reportedly knocking on the door, arguing for transparency as Governor Kemp signed the new election changes into law. Georgia State Patrol says Cannon was repeatedly warned for her behavior before she was arrested. Now the state representative awaits her day in court. And we have an update on the border situation. Our reporter Steve Lance is in Laredo, Texas right now. Steve, what can you tell us?
Yes, Steph, the Republican senators that toured the border gave an update while they were there. Senator Cruz says the Donna facility is way over capacity, and Senator Graham says the U.S. is actually complicit in human trafficking on the border. That's because federal agents are helping migrants make the last mile of their journey once they cross into the U.S. Let's take a look at some of the footage that the senators gathered on their expedition to the border. Texas Senator Ted Cruz and 18 other GOP senators visited the border to see how the crisis is playing out. Cruz said all the presidents from Bill Clinton to Trump let the media into border facilities, but he says the Biden administration has blocked media from covering it.
And the Biden administration sent down political handlers to try to keep silent, to try to keep the American people not knowing what's going on. The Donna facility is a giant tent city. Built with a capacity of 250, it has nearly 4,000 people in it.
While he stands on the shore of the Rio Grande River, Cruz explains in a Twitter post that he had already gone to detention facilities that are overrun. He said migrant mothers were housed in holding pens, sleeping on the floor, and nursing their babies. Senator Langford also visited migrant facilities on Friday with Cruz. The Oklahoma senator posted a video on Twitter that shows a pod inside a migrant holding center on the southern border that's over 8 times its capacity. Senator Lindsey Graham visited the border as well and spoke after the tour.
So the last thing I learned is that we're complicit as a nation in human trafficking.
He said that's because on his visit he learned there are markers on the U.S. side of the border. He said the federal government set those up to show illegal immigrants where to go. He said about $800 a day per child in taxpayer money is being used to transport people who pay cartels to get here the last mile of their journey. Graham said he's seen tough conditions from his tours in Iraq and Afghanistan and commented on the border situation.
What we're asking the men and women of the Border Patrol to do is inhumane. They have to deal with things that I don't know how they make it through the day. I don't know how their families stay together. So we owe it to them. Finally, the president said, I'm not going to apologize to anybody about my policies. Mr. President, you need to apologize to those whose job it is to secure the country for making their job impossible. And most importantly, you need to change.
At his press conference on Thursday, Biden said he would make no apologies for ending immigration policies that came into effect during Trump's term. Biden said those policies have an incredibly negative impact on the law and human dignity. We reached out to the Biden administration, but they didn't immediately respond. Still on the ground here at the We the People Stand for Border Security rally here in Laredo, Texas, a number of angel moms and community leaders expressed their concern for the welfare of those making the journey across the border. A theme throughout the event was that the women and children on both sides of the border are most affected by these policies, and that everyday Americans need to take action in their communities rather than relying on politicians. Here's what some of the speakers had to say.
Let's expose.
Christy Hutcherson founded Women Fighting for America as an everyday mom who wanted to protect American values.
If we can't affect our kids...
She organized today's event to protect America's border and the women and children on both sides of it. She said that she couldn't stay silent about what's happening at the border.
My heart has been completely changed. I'll probably never be the same again. We've witnessed rape trees. We've witnessed where the coyotes are bringing over men, women, and children. And at points, if they're too weak to make the journey, they tell them to sit right here and stay low and be quiet, and we'll be back. They find their bodies dead in the desert.
Hutcherson said many politicians claim having an open border and letting all the migrants in is compassionate, but she does not agree.
It's not compassionate to keep our borders open. It's not compassionate to allow the rape and exploitation of children. It's not compassionate to see where women have been literally gang raped and left for dead.
Kimberly Fletcher, founder of Women Across America, has spoken to both American and migrant women across the country. She says if you care about mothers and children, then you need to care about border security. She detailed what many migrants go through making the journey.
Then there's the rape trees, which I saw myself in Nogales. I remember asking my guide, why are there underwear and bras hanging from the tree? And he said, that's the trophy tree. Because when the women come across, they know That's just the rite of passage. That's part of the pay. And mothers are telling their children, their daughters, before they leave, make sure you take birth control so you don't get pregnant along the way when you're raped.
She says the American people and government can't stand by while the cartels make millions of dollars by exploiting these migrants and smuggling them into the U.S.
I have talked to these mothers. I have seen these children. I know personally what they have been through. You are allowing this to happen when you turn your head.
Some speakers shared how illegal crossing was hurting Americans in their own communities, making them unsafe. One Angel mom shared the story about how she lost her son.
I'm the legal immigrant. I'm the Angel mom. I'm better known as Dom's mom. And Dominic was the love of my life, my best friend. He was my only child. 2012, in California, Moreno Valley, at 5:45 a.m., an illegal alien from Guatemala with 2 felonies, 1 deportation, 2 DUIs, turned his unregistered, uninsured truck in front of my son as he was riding his motorcycle to work. He killed him instantly, and the impact was so strong that it threw Dominic into a wall on the sidewalk.
And a congressional candidate told us that in her community by the Rio Grande River, cartel members yell at children from the other shore.
Middle school that my children go to backs up to the river, kind of about like from here to there, so it's right there. But there's a city park that's right there, so they use that track around the city park for cross-country races and practice and track and all that kind of stuff. While the girls were doing track, the men were across the river yelling at them, saying, "Hey, we'll come pick you up after school. We know where you're at now. You're going to party, but you're not coming home." Things like that. They're coming to me telling me these stories.
All of these women have been personally impacted by illegal immigration, and they decided to take action in their local communities. These women, as well as many other speakers, urged Americans to get involved. They said it's up to the American people to protect the country, not just politicians. Thanks, Steph.
Yeah.
That's all we have from the U.S.-Mexico border. We'll be sure to keep you updated with the latest developments down here from the border. Steph?
Thank you, Steve, for those updates. And coming up, New York might become the 15th state to legalize recreational marijuana. The bill is set to be introduced next week. And one treehouse Airbnb in upstate New York gives visitors an experience they may never forget. All that and more on NTD News. New York lawmakers have been trying to legalize marijuana for the past 3 years, but it now looks like they could have a shot at passing a bill to do exactly that. If the measure succeeds, New York will become the 15th state to allow the drug for recreational use. NTD's Christina Kim has the story.
Reports say Governor Cuomo and lawmakers just reached an agreement on a bill to legalize marijuana in New York. Governor Andrew Cuomo has said legalizing marijuana is a top priority for him.
To say we're going to stop it is not an option. It is here. The only question is, do we regulate it here? Do we gather the revenue here?
The proposed bill would add a 13% tax to retail cannabis sales. 9% would go to the state, and 4% would be a local tax. State Senator Liz Krueger told the Post that a legal marijuana program could bring in around $300 million each year for the state. And the entire industry could potentially generate $4.2 billion, according to the New York Times. It would also allow New Yorkers 21 and older to grow a limited amount of marijuana plants at home. The measure will be introduced as a part of the state budget on April 1st. Governor Cuomo says he wants to get the budget done on time, but he won't risk public health to meet the deadline. Christina Kim, NTD News, New York.
The Big Apple has divided opinions when it comes to the police. Some say police reform is needed, while others say they need more funding and support. The City Council has signaled that to them, police reform is the way of the future. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the story.
New York City Council passed a number of police reform bills. The move comes amid growing calls to defund and reform the city's police. Now, if passed, one of the bills would make it easier for citizens to sue officers. But critics say bills like this weaken the police force.
There's no officer in their right mind that's going to go out there
and try to do their job correctly and worry about losing everything they have in the matter of seconds for doing their job.
The city has been working on police reform ever since New Yorkers started demanding it last year following the death of George Floyd. And it seems like New Yorkers still support the idea of reforming the city's police.
Yes, yeah, I do think the city needs police reform, definitely.
I think they need to be taught understanding and empathy a little bit more.
One bill would create a special unit for the Department of Transportation, also called DOT. This special unit would be in charge of responding to car accidents.
City council members are trying to change things when there's no need to do it. Officers have been taking car accidents for decades. It works out perfectly.
He added that the new DOT unit will make a lot of mistakes until they're on the same level of experience on which officers are already. In order to push for equality and fight against discrimination, another bill forces officers to document people's ethnicity when they get pulled over. Some say that measures like documenting people's color and ethnicity only lead to more division and racism. The mayor hasn't signed the bills into law yet, but he's expected to do so. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Owners of a goat farm in New York offer guests a unique place to stay on Airbnb. NTD's Sapphire Corder tells us more about the experience.
When people take a vacation, they want to unplug, go off-grid. One Airbnb in New York lets you stay in a treehouse and hang out with goats. At the Mariaville Goat Farm, vacationers can stay in either a treehouse or a yurt and get their fill of the 30 or so goats that live on the property.
They're so loved that they come right up to you. I never would have thought of goats as being cuddly and, and so soft and lovely.
But you can do more with goats besides just pet them.
They could have the experience of milking a goat, go on a hike with the goats if they'd like, or do a goaty cuddle.
There's other animals as well. Chickens, a pot-bellied pig, geese, rabbits, a miniature pony, and a sheep.
She gets a bit precocious, has sometimes charmed her way into the yurt.
Residents can take care of the animals, take walks, and even cook over a campfire. The experience has drawn a wide variety of guests, including CEOs and Netflix stars.
It's just a magical place.
The owner says running the Airbnb is a great chance for him to meet people from all walks of life. They all get something different from their stay.
Reconnect, be off-grid, slow down a little bit, and just, appreciate the humanity that's all around us.
They also have goat yoga and have retreats where you can hang out with the animals. Sapphire Corder, NTD News, New York.
Up next, San Francisco tourism is starting to get more visitors as restrictions lessen. They're recovering after a 61% drop last year. And Bay Area business owners are suffering from theft. We visit one store owner who says thieves broke into his store multiple times. That and more on NTD News.
Someone has to find the way to build the Great Dome. Completely new, completely original.
The coronavirus outbreak is the latest wake-up call.
U.S. Senator Ben Sasse put it plainly, the Chinese Communist Party has lied, is lying, and will continue to lie about coronavirus to protect the regime.
In 5 to 10 years, we'll have virtually no manufacturing capacity left for generic drugs. And again, this is 90% of our medicines.
And the world should know, if all gone false, the whole world falls, okay? Because the Chinese Communist Party is the existential risk of humanity, period.
Since the CCP took power, 80 million people have died from its policies and political campaigns.
They're using our institutions and our norms and our values against us in ways that we hadn't necessarily envisioned towards their own authoritarian agenda.
from the party's great firewall in cyberspace, or to that great wall of sand in the South China Sea.
More repression, more unfair competition, more predatory economic practices, indeed a more aggressive military posture as well.
If we do not meet this threat now, it's going to define our century.
Lockdowns have hurt the tourism industry in San Francisco, but it's starting to recover as restrictions ease. NTD's Eileen Ang has more from California.
According to one report, San Francisco tourism in 2020 dropped 61% compared to 2019. The San Francisco Travel Association predicts that domestic travel will pick up first before appealing to the international market. Earlier this week, the city leveled up to the less restrictive orange tier of the state's reopening map. This means many indoor activities like museums, places of worship, movie theaters, and restaurants may open at 50% capacity.
Here at Pier 39 and the Fisherman's Wharf, some of the top attractions in the city, tourism is gaining momentum again as we see more people allowed for indoor and outdoor dining.
Small businesses that were struggling are seeing hope again. They had to cut down on employees and hours to break even.
We starting to see more people coming down for lunch. We have more people walking in the area. We have more tourists from states and out of state also. So we're getting a little bit more relief, better relief, more customers going around.
Another owner said they are doing about a third of what they were doing compared to before the pandemic. They had 35 employees a year ago. Now there are 10.
Business is coming back. I see the tour buses go by now, and the double deckers, they have people on them, which is a good sign. Alcatraz is open, so it seems like things are going to come back. It may take a while.
They say they see more domestic tourists than international ones.
Doing a road trip right now for spring break for my son. It's his first time, so I brought him up here. But I took advantage of the fact that it's actually empty. There's not many people, and I'm able to explore, walk around without the concerns or worries of having something covering my face.
I don't know what I was really expecting, but it's really nice. I love the ocean. I love it. So it was a fun, last-minute trip.
Assuming there isn't another virus wave, San Francisco's tourism is expected to continue to gradually recover and may return to pre-pandemic levels by 2023. Eileen Ang, NTD News, San Francisco.
Small business owners in San Francisco are suffering from rampant theft, which often goes uninvestigated and unpunished, even during broad daylight. NTD's Eileen Ang brings us more.
Alfredo Mendez owns an electronics and souvenir store on San Francisco's Fisherman's Wharf. He said his store has been broken into 3 times in the last year, and criminals are smashing car windows and stealing bags.
Not just break out the cars, but they're breaking out our business too. So we're getting some big problems with that.
His store is guarded by a metal door, but the thieves can still pick the locks and pull the chains to break the glass window. And how much does it cost to repair?
A lot of money.
He shared a recent surveillance video of an intruder where the thief pulls out the alarm sensors. Amid the dire challenges, Mendez is still motivated.
Well, we have employees and, we want just to keep going, and we just want to try it again and again. That's our business mind that, we're thinking that we'll get better. And here we are, doing it slowly.
His store has been closed since last March, but just reopened 2 weeks ago. He is one of the many victims of the increasing robberies in the city. Under California law, theft under $950 is considered a misdemeanor. Business owners often tell their employees to stand down and not stop shoplifters to avoid injury and unwanted lawsuits.
There are many things can be done, like to have more security in the street, more people, more police to go around.
Last October, police recovered $8 million of stolen merchandise from a warehouse in the San Francisco Bay Area. A professional theft ring stole the goods from CVS and Walgreens. The bust was one of the largest in the nation. Eileen Ang, NTD News, San Francisco.
And coming up, China's foreign ministry claims this is a 19th century photo showing slavery in the U.S. A spokesman used it to accuse the U.S. of forced labor as the West bears down on China over human rights abuse. And Taiwan responds to growing military aggression from China with new long-range missiles. It's just reported the largest airspace incursion yet by Chinese jets. That and more on NTD News. Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn says today the Chinese Communist regime is one area that both Republicans and Democrats can agree on. Congress as a whole supports countering threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn says he's changed his attitude towards the Chinese Communist Party, in particular its strategic investments in technology. He says it's short-sighted to do business in China and presents threats economically and from a national security perspective.
We wanted to be clear-eyed about what the risk would be if the Chinese Communist Party, as they have done, had made strategic investments, not only acquiring the intellectual property, but actually the know-how to be able to take it back and make it in China. And as you know, if before you can do business in China, they basically want to get all your intellectual property and all your data as a condition of doing business there. And that's obviously a short-sighted step if you're an American company or an international company wanting to do business there.
Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced last month he has directed lawmakers to draft a package of measures investing in cutting-edge technologies to outcompete China. The investment comes as President Biden vows to engage in extreme competition with the Chinese regime by boosting critical domestic sectors. Countering threats posed by the Chinese Communist Party also enjoys bipartisan support in Congress.
Well, China is one area that where we are, I think, pretty close to unified.
Cornyn told the Hudson Institute Friday that China's goal is to dominate the U.S. and the world.
That China poses everything from Confucius Institutes to students studying here in the United States that are coerced into cooperating with their intelligence agencies. China seems to be just about everywhere. And you're right. Sometimes people want to make this an issue about the country of China or the Chinese people. This is the Communist Party's game plan.
Cornyn says the U.S. cannot and should not ignore China, but that it underestimated the Chinese Communist Party's drive. He says last week's bilateral meeting in Alaska between U.S. delegates and the Chinese regime's negotiators is a test of the Communist Party's commitment. Cornyn says other countries and U.S. allies who have similar challenges are also keenly watching what the U.S. does with its strategic investment reforms. Jenny Jing, NTD News.
China's foreign ministry is exposed for accusing the U.S. of forced labor using a photo taken at a prison in the 1960s. NTD's Tiffany Meyer brings us more.
China's foreign ministry is taking a public relations hit. That's after a top spokeswoman showcased a photo she said depicted American slaves picking cotton, supposedly taken in the 19th century. But the controversial photo is now revealed to be a fake. Spokeswoman Hua Chunying showcased the image at a press conference on Thursday. She described it as evidence of American slaves being forced to work in cotton fields and tried using it to blame the origins of forced labor practices on America, shifting the blame away from China and its human rights abuses in the Xinjiang region. But the photo actually has nothing to do with black slaves in the 19th century. The image was actually taken by American photographer Danny Leon in 1968 in Texas. The people seen in it were inmates at the Ferguson unit, a prison in Texas. Leon captured the image as part of a series of photos showing jail guards and prisoners. It was aimed at defending the rights of black people through showing their lives and work. The pictures have no connection to slavery. Despite the Chinese Communist regime's propaganda, a number of Chinese citizens aren't buying into Beijing's narrative about Xinjiang. Some of them are even taking a public stand and voicing their thoughts on social media. One of them writes, "I support the freedom to marry and have children in Xinjiang. I support the right for people to speak their own language and their right to practice their own culture, traditions, and beliefs that are closely related to their identity. If none of these are allowed, I support keeping families together and making sure they will never be separated." Another one posted a short yet powerful comment saying, "I support people in Xinjiang as human beings." Amid increasing chatter of war between Taiwan and Communist China, the democratic island has begun mass production of long-range missiles. It will have highly extended range and the capability to make precision strikes on Chinese targets. According to Taiwan's latest defense report, Beijing is, quote, posing increasing hostility and threats, further escalating the risk of accidents and clashes. Beijing has repeatedly flown warplanes into Taiwan's airspace in apparent acts of military aggression. On Friday, the island reported the largest ever incursion. A record-breaking 20 Chinese military jets entered Taiwan's air defense zone. On Thursday, a senior Taiwanese official said that one model of long-range missile has already entered production. Meanwhile, 3 others are currently in development. No details were given on the range of the missiles.
Chinese smartphone maker Xiaomi is reportedly planning to make electric cars now. They're partnering up with a Chinese auto company. NTD's Flora Bradley-Watson reports.
Another tech firm has joined the race to make electric vehicles. This time it's Chinese smartphone maker Xiaomi. Sources told Reuters that Xiaomi plans to make the cars using Great Wall's factory in China. Great Wall is also said to be providing engineering consultancy to speed up the project, with Xiaomi aiming to launch its first EV by 2023. News of the potential tie-up sent shares in both companies up as much as 9% and 15% respectively. Xiaomi has been looking to diversify its revenue streams from the smartphone business. It accounts for the bulk of its income but carries razor-thin profit margins. The company has also been hampered by the global chip shortage. Xiaomi joins a number of tech companies trying to leap into the car industry. Both Huawei and Apple are reported to be planning electric vehicles, with Apple potentially launching its offering as soon as 2024.
The Trump administration banned U.S. investors from owning the company's shares. It cited Xiaomi's ties to the Chinese military as the reason. Xiaomi launched a lawsuit against some of President Biden's cabinet members in January. Later, a U.S. court suspended Xiaomi's inclusion on the investment blacklist. And coming up, could the European Union be heading towards a vaccine war? EU leaders are tightening control over vaccine exports after a slow rollout and delayed deliveries. And an historic German brewery finds a way to save its unsold beer that's about to go down the drain. It's joining forces with local bakers. That and more on NTD News.
마루 유치원 폐쇄 명령서입니다.
전 폐쇄 명령 받아들일 수 없습니다.
유치원 폐쇄 명령이라.
좀 들어간 건 어떻게 됐어? 도저히 방법이 없대?
정일도 사장님을 대신해서 제가 대신 말씀드리면 안 되겠습니까?
In Europe, vaccination campaigns are still lagging behind for some countries. One reason for that, according to EU leaders, is delays to AstraZeneca's vaccine deliveries. NTD's David Vives has more.
On Thursday, European leaders agreed to tighten control of vaccine exports out of the European Union. This comes after a massive shortfall in contracted deliveries of AstraZeneca vaccines.
Of course, AstraZeneca has been an issue. I just remind you that we were expecting to have 120 million doses in Q1, and finally we got 30 million. So we had a problem with this company.
Since December 2020, the EU exported 77 million vaccine doses to other countries, including 21 million to the UK. Meanwhile, only 62 million vaccine doses were administered inside the Union. President Emmanuel Macron said France should follow the United States' example and prioritize the vaccination of its own people.
First, it's the end of naivety. I support the export control mechanisms put in place by the European Commission. I support the fact that we must block all exports for as long as some drug companies don't respect their commitments with Europeans.
as a third wave of CCP virus infection surges across Europe. Media in France says the vaccine war might have begun. It's another way to say vaccination campaigns are quite slow in France and some other countries, compared to the UK or the US. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
Norway will soon build the world's first full-scale ship tunnel. The government has now approved funds for the giant engineering project. It's known as the Stad Ship Tunnel. It'll be about 1 mile long, stretching under the Norwegian mountains. It would allow ships to avoid part of Norway's most dangerous shipping zone. The tunnel itself will be 108 feet high and 118 feet wide and allow ships of up to 16,000 tons to go through. Estimates put the project cost at about $350 million, and it'll take about 4 years to complete. And a 98-year-old woman in France and a 20-year-old student living in his parents' house in England have struck up an unlikely friendship during lockdown, one that the pair hope to continue as the restrictions ease.
Lockdowns have upended lives across the world. But for 98-year-old Frenchwoman Jacqueline Tolu and 20-year-old British student Elliot Bellman, the global health crisis has also created an unlikely friendship.
Lundi prochain, oui.
Tolu has endured isolation in her care home near Paris due to restricted visitors, while Bellman's plans to visit France this year as part of his studies were quashed by lockdown measures. For 6 months now, the pair have been chatting weekly over Skype, brought together by a scheme called Cher Ami that pairs elderly people with language students.
When I was asked if I would like to be linked up with another person, boy or girl, who wants to improve their French through conversation, I accepted as it would bring me great pleasure.
The opportunity alleviated Tolu's loneliness and brought Bellman, a third-year Warwick University student, an opportunity to practice his French. But the pair also really hit it off.
I was nervous, just meeting a new person, completely different generation, different culture, different language, obviously. So it's nerve-wracking. Thinking about maybe we don't get on, maybe she doesn't like me, maybe just like that generational gap would be too much. But as soon as I started talking to her, she's very easy to talk to. She's very funny. She just keeps the conversations going so easily. So this is my room.
Every Monday, Bellman dials in from his parents' home in southern England, Tolu from her wheelchair at the care home in Bonnay-sur-Marne. This time, Tolu told of her experience living through the 1944 Allied D-Day invasion on the Normandy landing beaches.
Thinking back, oh my goodness, how did I manage to live through that? I was so scared.
Tolu said their chats give her a mental escape from the confines of the care home for a little while every week.
Beer makers in Germany face a tough choice what to do with all their unsold beer that's about to expire. One brewery has found a solution by teaming up with local bakers. NTD's Evelyn Lee reports.
With restaurants and bars all closed due to pandemic restrictions, an historic German brewery is teaming up with local bakers. They're using its unsold beer to make bread. Nearly 1,600 gallons are close to the expiration date.
And that is now divided among local bakers. And now they make the alt beer bread ring.
Local bakers already use the leftover grains from the brewing process to produce hearty loaves of bread called Treberbrot. About a dozen bakeries are taking part, and they're offering a free bottle of beer from the brewery with each loaf.
Brixen also gets something from it, again on the reverse way basically, and also sells bottles, which is important for the breweries at the moment.
Beer sales in Germany have been hurt by lockdown measures. Restaurants and bars have been closed since November, except for takeout. That's a problem particularly for Germany's many small brewers like Füchschen. And customers are happy to support them.
It's a great campaign. Solidarity with one another is more important now than it has ever been.
The brewery CEO says the best thing about the deal with local bakers is they saved the beer, and it doesn't have to go down the drain. Evelyn Lee, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.